Hello, everyone. I am so excited today because we're joined by Megan Daum, someone who I admire on so many different fronts. She is a prolific author. She's written 6 books, or written or edited 6 books. She has been also a prolific journalist, very respected by many of our friends. She now is on Substack. Plus, she hosts A Special Place in Hell with Sarah Hayter, also a friend of the podcast. And before that, she had the Unspeakeasy podcast, which I listened to with really great interviews with heterodox thinkers. She's kind of like the Alex Kashuta of like a different sort of segment of the internet. And more recently, Megan has launched a series of retreats, which I kind of wanted to dig into now. It's called the Unspeakeasy, kind of inspired by one of her books, which is titled Unspeakable. And it is a place, sometimes they're mixed gendered, but they're mostly female only retreats. Pretty small, like very like sort of you can have a real conversation with everyone who goes. Maybe 16 people or fewer, Megan, or maybe sometimes 20,
Give or
right?
take. Yep.
Yeah. And behind closed doors, these, mostly all women finally get to sort of discuss what they want at whatever. That's what we want to get to is what do professional, educated, probably more affluent women in the United States think and say and worry about and discuss behind closed doors? Because I think there's this perception that the educated women of America are largely this progressive monolith. They all kind of think the same thing. Like they're not very interesting. Then you have some like far right, crazy women and like, whatever, like cam girls and cat girls or whatever. Like, but then there's like just this, there's nothing, a big question mark. So we wanted to, we might get into a little bit of an anti-natalist discussion at the end of this, but we wanted to get into what's going on behind closed doors with all these women.
Oh, well, if I couldn't tell you, right? If it was really behind closed doors, I wouldn't be able to tell you. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I love talking
Very
about
excited.
all these topics, and I will just say I've got my hand in so many things that it gets confusing what I'm doing. So I still host the Unspeakable podcast. So I actually have 2 podcasts. I do A Special Place in Hell with Sarah Hayter, and I know you've been on our podcast and she's been here. I do the Unspeakable podcast, which is sort of my flagship podcast, and that's an interview. It's a weekly interview show. Started it 4 years ago, summer of 2020, when every podcast started. And so, right. So I've been doing that. And yes, so the Speakeasy it's an enterprise that has sort of, arisen out of a lot of my work, the podcast, my books, my teaching as well. I've been a teacher of writing for a really long time. So yeah, I guess the easiest way to kind of launch into what the Unspeakeasy is about is to tell you the origins of it.
Yeah.
And that is I've been a journalist for a long time. I was a Los Angeles Times columnist for 12 years on the opinion page, written a bunch of books, written for every magazine, was like, an acceptable, celebrated, arguably celebrated member of the literary community.
I looked at the number of reviews your books have gotten. Yeah.
Yeah, they used to be really positive.
Yeah.
Yes. And, I've always been allergic to bullshit. Like that's my thing. I've never been really particularly political. I mean, obviously as a journalist, you have to write about what's going on in the news and the culture, but I just never liked virtue signaling even before there was a term for that. I just could spot it everywhere, and I was very sensitive to it, and I was very interested in why it was happening. So that's always been a theme of my work. And I've always tried to sort of look at the places, in the culture or in politics where like what people were saying about the world or themselves was not matching up with what was actually true about the world and themselves. So people, knew that about my work. And I started doing the podcast, and I would have people like Sam Harris and, all the sort of the heterodox, I've had hundreds and hundreds of guests by now, but people sort of trying to pick apart these issues, nuanced discussions, right? So nuanced AF is what the merch says. So right
Love
here.
it.
Here's the, yes, nuanced AF. Okay.
That looks good.
So, people would listen to the podcast. I was talking about things like gender, pretty early on. Sasha Ayad, who's, wonderful, is now the co-host of Gender A Wider Lens, was like my 5th guest. And, I had Peter Moskos on really early talking about policing. I had, John McWhorter, all these sorts of people, and also a lot of literary people, because that's my world. But I also teach writing. So I just teach, personal essay, memoir, opinion writing, that kind of thing. And I've taught at Columbia and elsewhere, but I teach private workshops. So, around 2021 or so, I started noticing that the people who were coming into my workshops, many of them women, not all by any means, but a lot of the women in particular were like not necessarily wanting to write. Like they didn't necessarily want their stuff workshopped. They just wanted a place to talk about things. And they knew that I talked about this stuff on my podcast and I wrote about it. And I had a certain approach that wasn't like particularly partisan, and that appealed to them. And they just wanted a place to talk about this. And they would come in and say, I can't talk about this with my friends. I've gotten kicked out of my book club.
Oh God.
I can't talk about this with my, I have lost relationships. Families are being torn apart over politics and over, wokeness, Trumpism, whatever it is. And I feel like I'm losing my mind and I feel so lonely.
Wow.
And they were silencing themselves in a way that was a little bit different from the way men were silencing themselves. I mean, obviously they were having a lot of the same problems at work. Like everybody wants to protect their, their paycheck and their situation at work. But women were really talking about relationships a lot more and talking about how they had a lot to say and they weren't speaking up because they didn't want to get excommunicated by the group and they didn't want to hurt people's feelings.
Yeah.
And I was seeing this on like this micro level, like people were talking about how this played out in their personal lives, normal people out in the world. And these were all kinds of women. These were women with big careers. These were stay-at-home moms. These were women in their 20s into their 60s, 70s, 80s. It was like so many all over
Big
the country,
range.
all over the
Wow.
world. Yeah, these were not like necessarily girl bosses. These were all kinds of women. And I was seeing this, and then I was also noticing that like in our sort of podcasting content creator space, a lot of the people who are speaking up about culture war issues are men. Not all by any means, but it's a very male dominated space. And I started to think, well, why is that? And the listener communities were like all men. Like, for like I went to a persuasion hangout, for instance, and there was one other woman there. And we were like, whoa, what is going on? And so I said, I really need to start a heterodox women's community. Like somebody needs to do that. And it's hilarious because I'm the last person who ever would start a woman's anything. Like I hate it. But I thought, something is really wrong here because women are left out of the conversation in the public arena and in their private lives, and they're leaving themselves out. And I want to try to fix that. And so
I want to dive into, you said the women have these conversations that they are afraid to have in public or they've gotten in trouble. What are these conversations? Like, what are the topics that you see come up again and again in this environment?
Yeah. So gender is a big one. School, lockdown, COVID policies is another big one. It's no accident that this started to emerge around COVID. You had a lot of people who were nice, normal liberals and remain so, still identify as liberals.
Yeah.
And they were suddenly like dealing with school closures that didn't make any sense in many cases. And then the kids were at home and then they could hear what the kids were learning on the Zoom school. Like all of a sudden they knew what was like, they didn't know what was going on in the classroom. And all of a sudden they're hearing it. The huge mental health crisis among kids during these years. And they're like, what is going on here? And a lot of the gender stuff started coming up. And these are a lot of people, a lot of parents, a lot of moms who are, very liberal. If my kid is gay, fine, fantastic, no problem. Even if my kid is trans, whatever that means, well, that must just be like gay 2.0. Okay, fine. Like we're liberal in this house. We believe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then they, this whole movement started to, kind of mushroom before our eyes. And they're like, what is going on here? And if they questioned, something like gender affirmation or something like that, the neighbors would say, what are you, a bigot? What are you, a transphobe? You can't do that. And so, they were really feeling like they were losing their minds. And I'm really careful about the way I talk about this stuff. And I think they appreciated it. So those are two examples, but we talk about everything in the Unspeakeasy, like everything.
Well, no, are there others? I mean, so this is really interesting because I think one, you're sort of charting where Republicans can win white educated women. It is on
that's our motto. That is not our motto, but yes.
Well, I know,
but you're right. Yes,
this is what I'm thinking. Like where do you win this demographic? And what I'm peeling here is one, I think is focus on I think gender transition in children. Very easy fight. And for some reason, the liberals always take it. And then 2 is bureaucratic overreach during COVID. I think Republicans need to live in the past a little with this. That was a good opportunity. Be like, Dems will try this again. Dems will try this again. Very much the way Dems do with like January 6th. Keep going back to the COVID stuff. And what was happening at schools then. I also think school choice is like an also really easy thing. But what else are you seeing like personal life wise? Like how do these, I guess here's the question I have. Is there regret about feminism and sort of the way it changed the expectations that were had of them?
We talk about that a lot. That's really complicated, right? Because it's like, how are we defining feminism?
Yeah.
What era of feminism? Are we talking about second wave feminism, third wave, fourth wave, digital feminism, online feminism, Me Too? Like, what are we talking about? And again, like we have a range of ages. So we have women who are in their 70s or 80s, and they came of age in the 60s and 70s and benefited enormously from second wave feminism. And then we have women who are in their 20s and 30s who are saying, oh my God, like nobody told me that there's such a thing as a biological clock. and I mean, you know, I'm a Gen Xer, so I grew up, you know, with every single women's magazine constantly being like, TikTok, ladies, there's a biological clock. So, you know, at some point along the way that, you know, being told that fertility was limited somehow became like a, you know, a misogynist or something. So they stopped talking about it that way.
That's so interesting.
I mean,
it reminds me of like when I grew up in like the period of feminism where we denied that there were like unspoken dating norms. Like if a guy invited you back to his hotel room, that he probably expected something and literally did not believe that. So like it's interesting to see like
it's dangerous situations.
It's worse than like biological clocks, not even like being a warning sign.
Right,
it's like basic, like
exactly.
Maybe don't go down an alleyway at 2 a.m. in a dangerous neighborhood.
I mean,
you know,
right. Yeah, I mean, I talk so much about this in my book, The Problem with Everything. I mean, this it's like, you know, just because we wish something was true doesn't mean it is true. Yes, we wish you could get blackout drunk and pass out in an alley with your clothes half off and have nothing happen to you. Yes, we that were true.
It'd be so nice.
And in a just world, it would be true. But we live in the real world, and if you're not equipping people with the facts about reality, then you're doing them a huge disservice. So these are the kinds of distinctions that we talk about a lot. And yeah, but I mean, the thing with the Unspeakeasy is it's all about the nuanced discussions. It's not partisan. I mean, we have women who are like Bernie Sanders voters, and we have women, you know, who are Trump voters. I don't think
you actually have Trump voters show up.
What's that?
Yeah, like we do.
Yeah, we do. But I mean, I would say it's changing all the time, but I mean, I would say it's mostly people who voted for Obama, people who are really excited about Obama, and then are sort of being like, wait a second, something is off here. But having a really kind of existential crisis about it.
One of the things that you mentioned that I'd love you to dig deeper into, because this is something we've noticed with our own fans of our podcast, is the generational change in terms of what's being hidden from people and the expectations people have. One example from our podcast is somebody was like, it's really weird to hear you guys talk about gays as a discriminated group when you were growing up, because at our school, like they're the group that's not allowed to be punished. Like they were talking about like a gay kid on their campus that like sold weed, and he wasn't punished because the school didn't want to be seen punishing a gay kid. And he's like,
all the drug dealers are gay now.
I've heard this. Yeah, I've heard that this is because you just get away with it apparently. And I'm interested in like other like what are the big like shocks to you in terms of generational change?
Well, I mean, one of the things that really animated me to get, you know, much more overtly involved in culture war discourse was what I saw around like online feminism. I mean, even before Me Too. So around 2012, 13, 14, there was all this stuff online that was, you know, it's never been a worse time to be a woman, you know, toxic masculinity, like, you know, obsessing about being catcalled on the street. You know, it's so terrible. We live in a rape culture, like all these ideas. And I was seeing it. And in the meantime, like, it's like actually women are doing better than ever before in the history of human civilization. It's never been a better time to be a woman, you know, in the West anyway. And it just wasn't making sense to me. And I was like, where is this coming from? Because I grew up in the 70s. I just thought that was being a girl was great and being a tomboy was great. Like being a girly girl was not cool. And so I really started to think a lot about maybe why these changes occurred. And I actually, I kind of had my nose out of joint. I was rolling my eyes a lot at like a lot of the the Jezebel stuff. I mean, Jezebel used to be a
Oh
brilliant,
man, yeah,
hilarious.
remember
Remember?
Jezebel?
Ah,
Wow.
it
What's
was so
Jezebel?
great. They would like actually,
Yeah.
this was back, they would like
Oh,
take
the magazine. Yeah.
Yeah,
was
yeah.
online. Yeah, Anna Holmes, the brilliant Anna Holmes started Jezebel, and sort of the mid 2000s, it was like they would do all these things where they showed the airbrushing and the
Loved it.
magazine
I
spreads, and they would
lived for
show like
that.
what actually happened, and it was great, and it was very
Yes.
snarky and sarcastic and very empowered and not victim-y at all, and just very funny.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the lines, it really changed, and it was like absolute preoccupation with male tears and
It got angry.
it got angry, and it got just very just stripped of its agency somehow.
Mhm.
And I used to roll my eyes at it a lot, and I still do, but I think that we cannot forget that the 90s came along. There was still this like riot girl kind of grunge aesthetic for women, but then you get into like the late 90s, early 2000s. First of all, you've got the Disney princess culture.
Mhm.
You've got this hyper girliness that
Mhm.
little girls are exposed to. Everybody's a princess dress, glitter, fairy wings everywhere, which is fun and fine, but like very different from the 70s when everybody was really just like gender neutral. And then you've got this raunch culture. You've got Girls Gone Wild. You've got Spring Break, bikini, just
Mhm.
absolute debauchery. And you've got, pornography goes online. Pornhub comes along.
Mhm.
We're just absolutely inundated with these hypersexualized, very degrading images around sex and around womanhood. And it makes sense, doesn't it, that like women would resist that and be
Mhm.
very angry about it. And
Oh, I never thought of like maybe a correlation being between honestly internet porn and women getting like feminism becoming angry, taking an angry
totally.
turn.
I mean,
Yeah.
I would
Huh.
be, and I mean, because I missed that stuff, right? Like in
That's
my
so
time,
interesting.
yeah, and also like, the way that men think about sex and what they expect from a date or a sexual encounter. I mean, like women younger than me talk. I mean, Sarah and I talk about this all the time. People say we're obsessed with like choking. Okay. Like the choking thing in
Well,
sex.
this is something where I have to go on a tangent because we actually wanted to do
Uh-oh.
like
Here
We're
we
going to do it
go.
here.
Here we go.
Someone's going to choke
like
somebody.
Mary Harrington also complains about this all the time.
Yes.
And I wanted to do like Mary Harrington versus reality. Because if you look at the statistics on choking, the guys are choking the girls because all of the other girls are asking for it.
Right.
Yeah, that's the
Choking is
problem.
much preferred. Girls
but why are they
more
asking
turned
for
on
it?
by being choked than guys are by choking
Because
girls
it's a big
at
turn
a
on,
rate of like 2
unfortunately.
to 1.
But is it a turn on, or do they think it's supposed to be a turn on?
No, it's
is a turn
enough
on.
of a turn on where like auto asphyxiation is
I
a
get
really
that.
major like a safety problem.
Yeah,
Like
no.
this came up in our sexuality research when Malcolm wrote The Pragmatist Guide to Sexuality, and we had to put in all these warnings. We're like, okay, this is a big turn on for people. Guys, don't do this.
We need to get
It's
into our
bad.
sexual theory because I think I know why you might find this weird. So we actually argue that the people act like the kinks and the things that turn somebody on are random. And I don't think that they are totally random. I think that there's specific polygenic sexual patterns that emerge based on the social environment evolutionarily our biology thinks that we're in. Now, if a woman in a historic context was sleeping with tons of men, that historically basically only happened if your tribe had been raided and you were a sex slave and you were doing everything you can to stay alive. I think that there is a correlation between women liking this incredibly demeaning sex and women who sleep around a ton. I think that what's happening here is their bodies have shifted to oh, I'm a sex slave desperately trying to prevent my captors from killing me, and I will like anything that keeps them from killing me. And so when I think a woman maybe like you or a woman who is more chaste or more like sexually reasonable engages with this, they're like, what? I would never want that. And or Mary Harrington or something like that. And I think that that's where there's this unintentional is we don't tell girls that sleeping with tons of people is going to change the type of things they find arousing.
Yeah, like in other words, Malcolm's saying that he thinks that our behaviors sexually, like especially number of different partners, will trigger different like arousal pathways as a sort of adaptive, evolved mechanism.
I think there could be some truth to that. I mean, I don't. Yeah, I'm not gonna.
Because
I'm not gonna
otherwise,
argue with
it is
that. I mean,
really weird, especially
yeah. I mean,
considering
we
how
don't know. I
dangerous
mean,
it is.
sexuality is so mysterious, right? We don't know
Yeah.
like where these things come from. I mean, where does like autogynephilia come from? Like, there's so many fetishes and
I have a hypothesis
paraphilias.
as
Like,
to where
who knows?
autogynephilia comes from. I haven't
Oh,
dropped
no.
it in the episode yet, so I'm going to drop it right here, okay? And we'll do a full episode on it. But I actually think autogynephilia comes from a misunderstanding of human sexuality. So in our book of Human Sexuality, we point out that sexuality should actually be thought of a spectrum of arousal to disgust and not stopping at zero. A lot of people are like, sex is arousal or you're not aroused. And it's like, no, it's arousal to disgust. Anything that
10 to negative 10.
If you when you're aroused, what happens? Your pupils dilate, you breathe in, you look at something longer. When you're disgusted, what do? You look away, your eyes contract, and you hold your nose. They're likely using the same system. And we even see evidence of this from the fact that anything that arouses a large portion of the population is going to disgust a small portion. Anything that disgusts a small portion is going to arouse a portion. People can be like, well, no, that's just everything. It's like, no, you don't see this random effect in everything else. So you can look at something like fire. Fire does not like randomly arouse a portion of the population, but like insects do. Poo does. Like, why is that? Okay, it's a misarousal to disgust system. Well, autogynephilia, I think it's actually a misinterpretation from a lot of men, which is to say that a lot of men have a very strong, much stronger than women have to female genitalia, disgust response to primary male sex characteristics. So specifically other male penises, other male forms, etc. It causes like a visceral reaction in them. I'm one of these men. I like find this disgusting.
But do you think that's socially constructed, or do you think that's like inherent?
It's probably more of we would
I
think it's an evolved like try to screw the thing that will produce kids.
Right, exactly. It's an adaptive trait.
Yeah.
If you're a woman, historically, there were periods in history, you look at around the agricultural revolution, for every 17 women having kids, only one male was having kids. So that means that you had long evolutionarily relevant periods where women were expected to be in relationships with lots of other women. So it is not surprising to me that women tolerance of other female sexuality was something that was selected for. However, historically speaking, if a man let other men sleep with a woman who he was pair bonded with, or just any other woman in the community, that's a net loss to him because that's the other guy.
No, I get that. No, I get that. I get that.
Like the pressures here. My guess is that what's happening with these guys is they're like, oh, well, when I like playing video games, I really like playing as female characters because any other male character or avatar causes this disgust reaction in them. When I like dressing up as other characters, I like always being a female, and they don't realize what's driving this is not an arousal reaction, but a disgust reaction to other males. And then they begin to identify, they're like, well, if I always like whenever I'm in a role-playing game or whenever I'm in a video game or whenever I'm a furry playing a female character, that must be because I secretly want to be a female, but it's not. Anyway, that's my
okay. No, I'm in no position to argue that.
But I want to get back to the Unspeakeasy.
Getting back to the way feminism and what the generational differences. Yeah, I do think that people, men and women, have plenty of reason to be angry and frustrated these days. I think that women have reason, and I think men have reason. I mean, a lot of the ironic misandry of that digital age, making fun of men, and I have a whole theory as to why that was sort of, sanctioned as an okay thing to do. Like all that sort of like, men are horrible, men are toxic. What we now see with this like red-pilled right-wing misogyny online, like that is a mimetic inversion, right? It is the same thing. I mean, it is absolutely mirroring it. So as much as I hate to see that stuff online, it's like, well, guess what, fourth wave feminists, you created this, you made this, and now you're stuck with it, or it's going to have to self-correct.
What's your theory?
Well, I mean, if you go around telling men that they're garbage.
No, not that. But you said I have a theory as to why this.
Well, so I mean, the thing is that around that time you started seeing this, 2014 or so, like they would be horrible to men. And I think the idea was that because men have power, you're punching up. It's okay to say terrible things to men, no matter
the patriarchy.
no matter what like class level you are or they are, no matter like any kind of power differential, it doesn't matter, because by definition, by virtue of being men, it was assumed that they automatically have more power. So it's okay to be terrible to them. And my thing was like, why are you assuming that? Like, that is so unfeminist to just like you by assuming that, you are effectively handing men power that they don't necessarily have. You are putting them on a pedestal in order to punch them. Well, how about realizing that women are doing so much better than men? Chances are, any given man and any given woman, that woman is going to have a higher level of education, have more friends, better connections. Just her well-being is going to be at a higher level across any number of metrics than any given man. So like, be careful who you're, calling a piece of garbage. It's really lame. And anyway, so this is what started this. And I was very outspoken about these things around, my book, The Problem with Everything, came out in 2019, which was all about this. And it was really about, being, it was a self-interrogation, like looking at the different generations. Like, well, how come I as a Gen Xer felt empowered in a way that these millennials and Gen Zers apparently don't? Like, what is this about? And why am I so frustrated? And why do I hate this stuff? And why am I rolling my eyes? And why are they mad at me and calling me an anti-feminist? And, it's all this kind of vortex of stuff. And people got really mad at me for it. Like, they just thought, oh no, she's just gone to the right. She swung over to the right. Megan has And the funny thing is, like, this is nothing different than I had said. I've been talking this way for my whole career.
Yeah, the Overton window has shifted.
Right.
Yeah.
Suddenly it was not allowed. And so here we all are in the whatever alternative media space, clown world, where we have beclowned ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm dying to see how you approach this, because this is something you mentioned in the origins of these retreats, and now it's kind of at the core of what I'm thinking about. What we call like woke culture, progressive culture, we call it the urban monoculture, and we argue that its main value proposition is, I will remove in the moment suffering or pain. That's kind of like the big, like, you cannot break that rule, and it sort of connects to everything that can be very damaging about the movement, because it causes a lot of bad downstream effects. You mentioned that many of the women who are joining Unspeakeasy retreats are doing it because they don't want to hurt their friends' feelings, and they're very much part of this. And I think it's a very female, on average, it skews female, that general desire to not cause conflict, to not hurt feelings. And yet I think for a lot of these women to deal with the cognitive dissonance they're facing, or to work through these problems, especially because you have so many differing opinions showing up at these retreats. You've got the Trump voter, you've got the Bernie voter, you've got, this varying range. There are going to be feelings that are hurt. How do you manage that, especially among like groups of women? Because I'm used to doing this in like retreats that are like primarily men, but how do you manage it for women who are going there because they know it's a problem, but they also are of that culture of like, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings?
Yeah. I mean, I am always aware of it. And I mean, I think we've been pretty lucky so far. So I started doing the retreats in 2022. We've probably done 12 by now or something. I mean, we did so many this year. We have done 8 this year.
Wow.
So I try to keep it very ideas based and concept based. So it's like, we don't have it. So the structure of the retreats, it varies. I mean, most of them, they're overnights. We go out to a beautiful place, and sometimes we'll spend like 3 nights overnight. Sometimes they're just like for a weekend, daytime only. But we'll have like, I will make a schedule, and we're going to talk, for 90 minutes about like, why can't we talk about gender without losing our minds? Like, that will be the framing of the talk, as opposed to these people are horrible and crazy. It's more like, why do we feel crazy? Why do I feel crazy? What led to it? And I'm going to talk about my experience. I mean, I cannot say that there haven't been hurt feelings. I'm sure that there have been. And we also have an online community. I mean, we have a really thriving private membership based online community that is, very affordable. And we have all kinds of things there, like book clubs and guest speakers and all kinds of things. And I know that there have been blow ups. I mean, there are little satellite groups, and people are actually forming. They're also forming, no, not satellite groups like ganging
like
up on people,
little
but, you know,
subgroups.
there's a
Yeah.
politics you know, there's a sort of left-leaning politics discussion group and a more center-right
Oh,
discussion group, and
interesting.
there's a stitch and bitch one that's they knit and they talk about politics.
Yeah.
The knitting world is very, very fraught.
Oh
So
my gosh. Yeah.
no
And Watch
idea
and
what
Reported
that
has done some great, knitting world
I can't control
drama.
that. But so I, you know, most of the conflict I have just stayed out of. But I think that they're really, really good, especially on the retreats. I think everybody knows we're out somewhere. We want to have a good time. They've, you know, they have invested a certain amount of resources and time to come and do this. We have enough downtime that they form friendships. I mean, they have come to these places because they are lonely and they want connection. So the last thing you're going to do is, you know, deliberately get into a bad dynamic with somebody. It's just not, it's not worth it. I'm not saying it never happens, but we've been really lucky. And frankly, the fact that we're all women really makes it so that any kind of political differences that we have are just transcended by the fact that we all have this thing in common. Like it really is it's an incredibly effective container for all kinds of points of view and walks of life and backgrounds and experiences. I mean, it's pretty magical, actually.
That sounds awesome. And I'm also sort of getting the impression that like going in with it being normative to disagree and like it's okay to disagree is just like the mere fact that that's a premise of the events probably helps. There's alcohol.
Yeah,
right?
Of course.
Okay.
I mean, not in the morning or anything.
Sure. Yeah.
But Simone, I want to move to the second topic here. The
anti-natalism.
Anti-natalism. So why shouldn't women be obligated to have children?
Well, some people are terrible parents and make terrible parents. So if you're going to be a terrible parent, please do not force that person to become one.
I concur.
I mean, shouldn't they learn to be better? Like,
no, you can't learn that. I mean, can you learn to be? Yes. I mean, the thing is, it is normative to try to learn to be a better parent. Everything in the culture. I mean, maybe you see this differently, but again, this might be a generational thing. I mean, I grew up. I assumed I would have kids. It was assumed that everybody was going to have kids, that everybody wanted them, and that everybody would be a good parent, that it would just come naturally to you. Even if you thought you didn't want kids, the minute it's your own, everything will be different. And the fact is that most people do want kids. Like people who don't want them are outliers, and I'm an outlier. But it's just never something that I wanted to do. Hi! Oh my God, it's so cute. I really love that her age of baby. I have to say, like if I could just have that age.
Yeah, no, it's very short-lived that age.
Immobile.
I know. I know.
Well, so this is something. Were you a single kid yourself?
No, I have a brother. He doesn't have kids either.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely, I mean, people choose not to have kids for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about this book that you worked on about not having kids. I find that interesting.
Right. So the book is called Selfish, Shallow, and Self-Absorbed, 16 writers on the decision not to have kids. So I wanted to do this project for a long time because
it sounds like a pro-natalist book, by the way.
Well, it's ironic.
Yeah.
It came out in 2015, back when irony was still alive.
Yeah. Those are good days.
Not anymore.
Yeah, it was right before everything changed. But I always thought that people, the sort of childless by choice, child-free crowd had really bad PR because instead of just saying like, oh, I just don't want to have kids, it's not for me, they would always be like, oh, I don't have kids because I want to have a fabulous life and take expensive vacations. Or like, my child has 4 legs and drinks out of a bowl on the floor. Ha ha ha. My fur baby. Or my child is that boat in my driveway. And it's like so ridiculous because nobody decided not to have kids so they could have a boat or expensive shoes. Like if anybody is that way, I don't want to know that person. Like,
oh my God, I love
absurd.
it.
That's absurd.
I can think of several people.
It was always amazing to me that there was such a taboo against saying this just isn't for me, that people would like present themselves as selfish assholes because this was somehow better.
There was
as
no
materialistic, shallow pleasure seekers, because it was just not okay to say, hey, I think parenthood is really important and it should only be done by people who want to do it. I mean, my position is like people who think hard about this and choose not to have kids, they are paying the ultimate respect to parents, because they're saying that this job is really hard and it should only be done by people who really want to do it. That's
I
it.
like that. Well, it's so confusing to me though, the bad PR. And maybe it's a generational thing. I'm not sure. I never planned on having kids, and I would tell people that, and they'd always kind of be like, good for you. And I
You
don't know
go,
if that's
girl.
like me personally, like they're just like, yeah, she'd be a terrible
Right.
mother. Like my mom was definitely in that camp.
I thought she was saying that about me.
No. She'd look at you and she'd be like, oh, you're going to be such a great dad. And then she'd look at me and she'd be like, and then she'd kind of look back at Malcolm. But yeah, I don't know. I know that some people really feel that. And I'm so intrigued by this, that like a lot of people feel that shame and feel like it's, whereas I grew up in like, with the environment, it was the proper decision to not have kids. And that, a lot of people were going to be shitty parents like me. Of course, whoops. And then
Simone.
ruh-roh. Oh no, what have I done? And yeah, I'm curious if you have come across people who celebrate it or support it more normatively, or maybe it's just like, if you don't want to have kids, well, where did you grow up? Yeah, like I don't know.
I mean, I grew up like, my family's a little bit unusual, but I mean, I grew up in outside of New York City. Mostly, we kind of moved around a lot. I grew up in Texas and in New Jersey, but
more traditional then.
But yeah, I mean, look, I was a teenager in the 80s, and
families were way more normative then.
Yeah, they were normal. And then, but you were also like, if you were kind of educated classes, then that the whole sort of like yuppie baby boom, like women is going to go, put her power suit and her running shoes on and go to the office and achieve, and then like marry her equal. And then they were going to, then they would have kids and like do it all. Like that was the fantasy.
Yeah.
And I definitely thought that was what I would do. I didn't really question it, but I always was sort of like, well, I don't really want kids, but I will want them. I'm sure like something will happen. One day I'll wake up and, the biological alarm clock will have gone off. And it just really could never get there in an authentic way. But, I think you're right, because I think that, for the millennials, the climate stuff did affect people. I mean, I used to say that anybody who said, I probably said this like 20 years ago, that anybody who says that they didn't have kids because of the environment, as they used to call it, is lying, because they're just using that as an excuse.
Couldn't have been a popular thing to say.
But I don't know now. But that was before this like absolute hysteria and fear of God was put into a whole generation. So I don't know.
I mean, it's a religious thing at this point. To me, when I look at some people, they do seem to be a little cult-like in regards to like, they don't seem to logically be thinking about the environment in any way that I would, I guess, think about the environment.
Look, people run on emotion. It's really hard for people to decouple their personal experience from data. It's really hard for people to decouple their feelings from facts. Sorry, facts versus feelings. And, it takes a certain kind of person to do that. And, you guys are like that, and I'm like that, and Sarah's like that, but like, we're kind of abnormal,
Still a little weird.
We're outliers.
Were there any arguments in the essays in the book that surprised you? Like, that's an argument that makes me feel really good about being child-free.
I mean, it really ranged. I mean, a lot of people spoke about their, sort of trauma in their families growing up and how they didn't want to repeat that. But, I have to say that, one response to traumatic upbringing is to not want to have kids, not repeat it. But an even more common response is to have kids, and so that you can correct it. Like,
do over.
Because of what happened.
Yeah.
I want to do this. I want to do over. Right. So I don't think we can generalize and say like, this particular kind of household causes people to feel one way or the other. I mean, everybody's wired so differently. There was a lot of, so the book came out in 2015, and one of the criticisms, I mean, it did so well. That's a hilarious thing, was like, I had been pitching this idea for years, and everyone in publishing was like, that's a terrible idea. Nobody will buy that. There's no market for this.
5 stars, 794 reviews on Amazon.
It was on the bestseller list in the child care and parenting category. Because I kept saying like, no, parents are going to be fascinated by this. This isn't just like childless people are going to buy this, because it's really about, it's about the way we live our lives. It's not even about like this particular decision. Like ultimately, it's just sort of about what you want your life to be.
Yeah.
But there was one of the criticisms of the book, and I think it's a fair one, was that a lot of the writers were kind of apologizing for the way they felt. There was a lot of, well, I love kids, but I don't hate children or anything.
Oh,
but
wrong approach.
and
I
however,
hated kids before I had kids.
yeah, well, I kind of hate kids now, to be honest with you.
Kids
you
are
know,
the worst. They're
yeah.
gross.
Yeah,
I don't know what
hated
to
being
say.
a kid, and so there was a lot of that. I will say, however, that in 2015, that throat clearing was probably necessary in order to make the book palatable. I don't think we would need it now, obviously, but I think that for whatever reason, people needed to hear that because there was still a lot of like, oh, you must just hate children if you have made this
And
decision. And I think a lot of people were like, no, I really like kids. And in fact, there were people who talked about working with children, and they talked about feeling really important as like an aunt or an uncle. There were 3 men in the book. It was 13 women and 3 men, because I really wanted to include some male perspectives, because I think men get overlooked in this discussion a lot.
Totally.
Well, that's really cool. Anyway, I have had a great time talking to you. I hope
Yes.
to, come on your podcast again sometime. I think you guys' work is fantastic.
Thanks.
And yeah.
And everyone, please, you can learn more about everything that Megan does at megandaum.com. That's MEGHAMDAUM.
Yeah, and actually a better place to go is to the unspeakeasy.com or my Substack. Yeah, actually, I haven't, I'm one of those people with too many websites, and megandaum.com has not been updated. Go to my Substack.
Oh yeah, megandaum.substack.com.
Yes. Yeah, or the Unspeakable with Megan Daum. You can look that up.
I will say you are one of the only guests that we've had where I actually recreationally watch your content.
Yeah.
Not all of it, but
the show with Sarah.
some of it, yeah. A lot of the time I don't. I'll have on guests where I'm like, I know we're ideologically aligned, but I don't actually watch their stuff.
Yeah. Malcolm's a fan. Malcolm's a fan.
Thank
both
you.
of us are. But yeah.
It's a good, if
unusual for
audience is
Malcolm
wondering
too.
what to think, it's very good, like urban monoculture looking at itself. I think it's no, I mean, it's like, what do, educated, successful women think of their own culture?
Yeah. Well, and we have a big age difference. I mean, we're 20 years apart. So I think
so get those
that's kind of
different
the secret
perspectives.
sauce. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so fun. Yeah. Especially when you want like a conversational chatty show. Like a lot of podcasts like just don't have that charisma. You guys have the,
Good.
as the kids say, you have the Riz.
The Riz.
I am too old for this.
I know.
I love it.
I've heard of the Riz. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for
have a spectacular day.
Yeah, we hope to have you back soon.
All right.
Okay, I'm playing with all my toys here.
Bye. Bye, Megan.
Bye.
All right, ending recording. And that's how Rubik's Cubes work?
Yeah.
Okay, so what are you going to do with your Rubik's Cube once it's solved? Are you going to break it again?
No.
No? Well, I mean,
No, I'm just gonna solve it.
you're just going to solve it? Okay, well. Hi, Toasty. You just want what, buddy? You want a Mickey Mouse bicycle? Is not the bicycle we have all right? You want one that has Mickey Mouse on it? Or he wants a Mickey Mouse bicycle?
We need new bikes for the kids when they're chasing Johns. And we want to give them our bikes. Because right now they have 2 bikes, so 2 of them can ride down the hill. And they were doing that for an hour, but Octavian got Twisty got very jealous.
Oh, that's fair.
So either more fancy, because right now they're using cheap bikes at their house, so we can get them either more cheap bikes or fancy bikes. What, I need to stop talking to mommy?
Okay, fried rice is almost done, buddy. I think we're good to go.
Oh, you want to talk to mommy and you don't want daddy to talk to mommy?
Okay.
Mommy, I'm so thirsty.
Okay. Okay.